Hello, I'm Nathan Lewis, and this is the 5th episode of a series on the gold standard. I've written 5 books about economics, including 3 about the gold standard. I'm also a fellow at the Wealth and Poverty Center at the Discovery Institute. My website is newworldeconomics.com. In 1949, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Alan Sproul, said, "We can't have, or we don't want, both an automatic gold coin standard and discretionary control of the reserve base by a monetary authority. The existence of two independent and frequently incompatible types of control over the reserves of our banking system is undesirable. In the light of that finding, we abandoned the gold coin standard as a control over the domestic money supply and placed our reliance in monetary management by the Federal Reserve. I think it has become established American policy that a principal means of government intervention in the economic processes of the country is the administration of broad credit powers by the Federal Reserve System. In this way, a pervasive influence may be brought to bear on our economy without intrusion upon specific transactions between individuals, which is likely to be the consequence of more detailed physical controls, and which would spell the end of democratic capitalism as we have known it." Sproul states very clearly that the automatic process of the gold standard system, whose goal was merely to keep the value of the currency stable versus its gold benchmark, in an automatic fashion with no discretionary involvement, as described in Episode 4, was de-emphasized after World War II and the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944 in favor of a doctrine of manipulation of money and credit as a means to affect the broader macroeconomy. Nevertheless, the dollar did not float during this time. There was still a policy of keeping its value at the $35 an ounce parity with gold reconfirmed at Bretton Woods in 1944. This situation of attempting to combine both a discretionary monetary policy, which implies a floating fiat currency, with a fixed value stable money system is, as Sproul called it, incompatible. The result of this incompatibility was the breakdown of the system in 1971 and the beginning of the floating fiat currency era that we are still in today. In Episode 1, we looked at the two basic monetary paradigms, the hard money or classical paradigm and the soft money or mercantilist paradigm. When we describe the two paradigms side by side in this fashion, it is pretty obvious that they have completely different goals and are basically incompatible. You can't mix them together. However, usually people do not have this kind of clarity of understanding. They hear somewhere that having a fixed currency value and fixed exchange rates is a good thing. They hear somewhere else that manipulating money and credit might produce favorable macroeconomic outcomes. Naturally, they try to achieve both goals since two good things is better than one. Then they are surprised when the system blows up in their face, as Sproul warned that it would. Such a system with a currency that is inherently a floating currency and whose money supply is not adjusted to keep its value fixed to some parity is typically maintained for some period by some form of coercion or capital controls. In the 1990s, after the failure of many more such inherently contradictory systems during that decade, economists managed to describe more clearly the problem that Sproul identified 50 years earlier. They called this the currency trilemma or impossible trinity. This is the assertion that a currency can either have a fixed exchange rate, free capital flow, and no macroeconomic manipulation, here called a sovereign monetary policy, or a floating rate, free capital flow, and active sovereign monetary policy, or a fixed rate and active monetary policy and capital controls. The economist Paul Krugman, who is not a gold standard enthusiast, described in 1999. The point is that you can't have it all. A country must pick 2 out of 3. It can fix its exchange rate without emasculating its central bank, but only by maintaining controls on capital flows, like China today. It can leave capital movement free but retain monetary autonomy, but only by letting the exchange rate fluctuate, like Britain or Canada. Or it can choose to leave capital free and stabilize the currency, but only by abandoning any ability to adjust interest rates to fight inflation or recession, like Argentina today, or for that matter, most of Europe. Attempting to merge classical and mercantilist ambitions, fixed currency values, and active discretionary macroeconomic manipulation is inherently contradictory. It is a system that is prone to blowing up. This contradiction is temporarily maintained by the use of capital controls. But in time, inevitably, a point is reached where the system fails and the currency either becomes a floating fiat currency, or perhaps macroeconomic manipulation is abandoned in favor of fixed currency value. The so-called trinity collapses into the basic choice between classical stable values or mercantilist macroeconomic manipulation and floating currencies. By calling this a trilemma or impossible trinity, instead of a simple choice and a warning of what to avoid, economists still express their basic desire to have their cake and eat it too, to obtain all the advantages of classical fixed values and also the supposed advantages of active macroeconomic manipulation. Even after 50 years of continuous failure, this dream continued among the academic economists. In episode 4, we saw that the basic process by which a currency is made to have a value fixed to some benchmark, perhaps gold or some other major world currency, is that the base money supply contracts when the currency is below its parity value and expands when it is above the parity value. Besides this basic mechanism, there is no discretionary management of the money supply or interest rates. It is often called automatic. The most common way this is achieved is with conversion at the parity price. This is most rigorously applied in the case of currency boards today. As currency board expert Steve Hanke described, no currency board has ever failed in practice. Crypto stablecoins usually work the same way. Thus, we should expect to see that, in the case of these attempted hybrid systems, such as were common in the Bretton Woods period and remain common today, this basic process is not implemented. We might expect to find that, even though the currency is sagging in value compared to its parity, and often there are continuous sales of gold or foreign exchange reserves as a result, the base money supply does not contract to support the currency. There is no effective mechanism to maintain the value of the currency at its fixed parity value. This is sometimes called a pegged system instead of a fixed system like a currency board. The economist Robert Mundell, who won a Nobel Prize in 1999 primarily for his involvement in monetary topics, said in 2001, "The distinction between fixed and pegged rates that I find useful refers to the adjustment mechanism. Under a fixed rate system, the adjustment mechanism is allowed to work, whereas under pegged rates, the central bank pegs the exchange rate but does not give any priority to maintaining equilibrium in the balance of payments. There is no real commitment of policy to maintaining the parity, and it makes the currency a sitting duck for speculators. I do not count pegged but adjustable rates among the category of fixed rates. But when economists attack fixed rates, they nearly always focus their attention on pegged rates. I have never nor ever would advocate a general system of pegged rates. Pegged rate systems always break down. A general system of pegged rates is basically what was in use during the Bretton Woods period and which broke down in 1971 in the midst of worldwide peace and prosperity. During the 1950s and 1960s, there was a continuous outflow of gold reserves, evidence that the value of the U.S. dollar was sagging beneath its $35 an ounce parity. We should expect that in such a situation, the base money supply would contract by the amount of the gold bullion sold, which would support the currency's value. But this did not happen. Instead, the base money supply steadily grew, even as gold continued to drain away via the conversion mechanism. The Federal Reserve prioritized interest rate manipulation and also monetarist doctrine that asserted that a steady increase in the base money supply was a desirable goal. In 1970 and 1971, President Richard Nixon intensified these long-standing trends when he attempted to secure his re-election in 1972 by easing monetary policy still further. The result was the complete breakdown of the system in 1971. The same basic pattern is evident over and over again whenever these hybrid peg systems have another predictable crisis. Even though sales of gold or foreign currency reserves might be very aggressive, there is no corresponding reduction in the base money supply, which should arise as a natural consequence. The conversion process is sterilized, to use a common economic term. Usually, there is not some dramatic increase in the base money supply. The common narrative that central banks print money in some irresponsible fashion and then the currency falls in value actually rarely takes place. Normally, the base money supply is almost unchanged or perhaps is rising at a single-digit annual rate, as was the case in 1971. But there is no contraction of the base money supply that would normally occur automatically as a result of sales of assets through the conversion mechanism, the means by which a fixed-value currency system supports currency value whenever it is sagging below its fixed parity. There is nothing supporting the currency. We can see this pattern in the case of Thailand, where the Thai baht currency had a terrible breakdown in 1997. The base money supply was almost unchanged through this episode. There was no dramatic money printing going on. As the currency sagged beneath its fixed dollar parity, dollar foreign exchange reserves were sold to support the currency's value. During this time, a total of $14 billion of dollar foreign exchange reserves were sold. The total value of the Thai baht base money supply at the beginning of 1997 was $17 billion. The consequence of selling $14 billion of foreign reserves should have been to reduce the Thai baht monetary base by 82% as a result of the conversion process. This is what would have happened with a rigorous currency board system. In practice, it would never have been necessary to reduce the monetary base by so much. After perhaps a 10% or 20% reduction, the value of the Thai baht would rise back to its parity and conversion outflows would cease. It would have required sales of foreign reserves of only about $3 billion, not $14 billion. You can see this process in the case of the US dollar stablecoin Tether, which has had a number of periods when, due to questions about the proper management of the system, people sold Tether coins aggressively. The Tether stablecoin money supply contracted, in line with US dollar conversion outflows. This supported the currency's value. When it became apparent that the Tether stablecoin was actually quite reliable, even in these crisis moments, the long-term trend of its increasing popularity continued, and the Tether money supply again expanded. It is not hard to see the difference between the example of Tether and the example of the Thai baht in 1997 or the US dollar in 1971. This is what Robert Mundell refers to when he describes the difference between a so-called fixed and a pegged system. For example of a currency or currency-like item whose value is fixed to gold, we can look at the GLD ETF. The shares outstanding of this ETF, comparable to the base money supply for a currency, also goes up and down according to conversion inflows and outflows. Like the Tether stablecoin or the Tether gold stablecoin, it has also remained reliably fixed in value to its gold parity. If we look at actual currencies fixed to gold in the 19th century, we find that, much like Tether or the GLD ETF, they had a long-term trend upwards due to economic expansion, but also extended periods where the money supply contracted as the automatic conversion process adjusted the supply to maintain the value of the currency at its fixed gold parity. These contractions in money supply did not cause any economic difficulties. People could go about their business confident that their money was reliably stable in value. By now, it should be pretty obvious why some mismanaged, pegged currency systems break down. It should also be pretty obvious that the people involved in managing these currencies are mostly incompetent. This includes what you could call weaponized incompetence. There are a lot of economists at central banks and elsewhere that actually want the existing fixed-rate system to break down. They prefer the soft money paradigm of floating fiat currencies. Thus, their apparent incompetence achieves their goals. In 1975, in the midst of the terrible monetary inflation of the 1970s, the economist John Kenneth Galbraith said, "If anything is evident from this history, it is that the task attracts a very low level of talent, one that is protected in its highly imperfect profession by the mystery that is thought to enfold the subject of economics in general and of money in particular. There is reluctance in our time to attribute great consequences to human inadequacy, to what in a semantically less cautious era was called stupidity. There is no difficulty whatever in distinguishing between success and failure. Henceforth, it should be the simple rule in all economic and monetary affairs that anyone who has to explain failure has failed. We should be kind to those whose performance has been poor, but we must never be so gracious as to keep them in office." The better economists, like Mundell or Galbraith, have always known that these people are stupid. By now, you should have the uncomfortable feeling that you already know more about these things than the average mediocre economic expert. And in fact, you do. It is not really very hard to understand. Frank Graham was another economist who could clearly see the inherent self-contradiction and future breakdown of the Bretton Woods gold standard arrangement. In 1949, he said, "It would seem that, after all this, we might have learned that we cannot both have our cake and eat it. We should know that we must either forego fixed exchange rates or national sovereignty," which he means discretionary monetary policy. There is not even the slightest provision for the adoption of the congruent monetary policies without which a system of fixed exchange rates simply does not make sense. He added, "Uncoordinated national monetary policies, non-discriminatory multilateral trade on the basis of free enterprise, and exchange rates fixed, even provisionally, cannot be made to mix. We must choose between them." Graham described almost exactly what was later known as the currency trilemma, or impossible trinity. In those days, most economists didn't know what Graham was talking about. If we are going to have another era of currencies fixed to gold, then the economic expert class, and also those who oversee their activities, will need a strong understanding of how to do things correctly, and also the common ways in which mistakes are made. Fortunately, this is not very hard to achieve. In episode 6, we will look at many things that have been said about the gold standard that aren't true.